Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's now about time that we begin. And it's again like yesterday in the evening, for those of you who had been here, a very, very warm welcome. We are more than delighted to have you here. And it's just fantastic to have, first of all, such a fascinating topic, and secondly, such a fascinating audience and a less fascinating university. I will come back to that in a moment. And I'm afraid that you know the topic, or that you are fearing that are touching on the same topic as I did yesterday. And your fear is absolutely right and justified. Before, however, I go into these sad news or informations that I have to give, I want to express my gratitude to a couple of people. First of all, to the panelists, of course, and among them, above all of them, and you, Fabian, you will please forgive me, you have the closest distance to come here. The longest, by far longest, is Chris Bates. He made all the way from Indiana, which is not exactly next door. He made it for this conference. We are extremely grateful that you are here. Thank you so very much. I will say a few more words about him in a moment. But I want also to thank extremely intensely the now SMS and emails reading Markus Kaulatz. Not only that, he came from Munich, which again is something which is not entirely next door, but compared to Indiana, I mean around the corner. But he's also a member of a law firm, CMS Hasche Siegler in Munich, and thanks to him, it's his law firm which is sponsoring this event, so that we can afford to do this. After all, it's always money that is involved and that it costs. We owe this to Markus, and therefore thank you very much for making this possible. So once again, I find it's necessary to point out that for those who have been here, not here yesterday, they don't know it yet, and for that reason I'm mentioning this guy with the photograph. And that is Robin. He is the mastermind of the entire thing. He is the guy who made me the puppet on the string, that I'm getting involved into blockchain things. I know nothing about it. I mean, after all, I'm the old guy. And finally, we have even the fourth speaker coming in from the wrong door. I mean, wherever you came in. I'm glad that you didn't come down from the roof. And so it was him who brought me into this field, and we published a wonderful article together, of which I think that copies are still lying out over there at the entrance, I guess. It wouldn't be something for you, Chris, because it's written in German, unless you want to learn finally a little bit of German. Having all said this, one further sort of neutral remark. Like yesterday, we really urge you, in particular I urge you, Herr Fischer, your father is over there, I urge you definitely to continue like we ended yesterday. Please, please raise your fingers, ask the questions that are pressing you. Doesn't matter if it is a little bit offline, and feel really like at home. This is an event at the university which is meant to be interactive, and we want to hear your ideas, your questions, your contributions to what is presented here. Having said this, I have on my list, the next point is introduction of the speakers. We begin with Fabian. Fabian was recently called where did I read it? The father of the IOC. Okay, whatsoever. He's the father of the ICO standard. He, of course, like all, I mean, they are outstanding people. He's a web designer and developer, member of the Ethereum developer team, and Well, Robin has written down a couple of things which are just impressive, but I skip it. Fabian is a great guy. We are extremely happy that you're here. He's the one who lives closest to this place here, and for that reason, thank you that you made the few steps over. Even then, he failed. He didn't find it immediately. The next speaker is going to be Chris Bates, and that we are here. This is a presentation, or this is an event organized by some way, somehow, or it comes from the law school. And for that reason, we are extremely fascinated, particularly me, because as I indicated in the talk that we just had, I'm teaching again in this semester law of property. And I'm right now trying to make my students aware of the fact that, and he is kind of father of that, another father, of the blockchain-based registers, so land registers. Those of you who are in the third semester, who are in my law of property class, they know what I'm talking about, that this is of incredible importance. If you were anybody from Greece, they would also know that this is something which could be of importance for them, because you need the precision for foreign investment. The precision is, in order to get a foreign investor into your country, you need to give him the security, the reliability of your registers. And that is what he's working on. And a country like Ghana is already trying to put this into practice, or they have already put it in practice. So for that reason, once again, thank you so very much that you're here. The next speaker after the break will be Markus Kaulatz, whom I mentioned already. And again, to you, thank you so very much. He is working in Munich, which is a city, I think. Yeah, they have running water and something like that. I'm just making this joke. I lived there for 30 years, and so I know what I'm talking about. He's a lawyer specialized in IT, and he's also a developer. And he is here in Germany, well known for those in the area. He's one of the first writers ever on these issues we are tackling here. He's talking about blockchain-based arbitration and dispute resolution, something for those who are in my third semester class, have also my class in civil procedure. They should be highly interested in what you're saying. Then finally, we have the guy who finally made it here into this room, and that is Tom Bregelmann. He is, I know him already longer because we are connected through insolvency law. He is a practitioner, and I'm a theorist. And he is working at BML and a law firm for insolvency. He was before the General Counsel of Leverton, and he is an influence of legal tech and legal implications of blockchain. He will talk about something what we are about to write an article on, namely the assets, again, something which I only yesterday mentioned in the class in the law of property. We are talking about digitalization of assets, or assets in the digital world. And I mentioned this yesterday. I'm picking up this as last word. The guy whom I made a reference to, that he had written a couple of years ago, a dissertation on property rights in Second Life. That's the guy who's sitting over there, and he's going to ask questions. Brings me back to that. We expect you to participate. It's a free thing here, but what you have to pay is contributions to the discussions. Having said this, Fabian, thank you so very much for being here. It's your floor.
Thank you. I will also shortly introduce myself and name all the things which were left out. So, yeah, I'm actually a software developer and working as a web developer since a long time, and now working in the decentralized space since 4 years. And I built a few of the Ethereum user-facing and developer-facing applications and tools. And this is, for example, the Ethereum wallet, the Mist browser, which is kind of like a browser for the decentralized web. Web3.js is a JavaScript library developers use to interact with Ethereum and writing smart contracts. And I also initiated, together with Vitalik and a lot of other people, obviously, the ERC20 token standard. And this is kind of like currently it's the standard for all the tokens on the Ethereum blockchain, and most of ICOs are using the Ethereum blockchain to make ICOs, and that is what they use there. And I also initiated now another standard about a blockchain identity called ERC725, and people are discussing about that as well right now. So I will be speaking about first how tokens work and what they are, because I guess most of you are law students, is that right? Can you lift your arm if you're a law student? Yeah? Or in the law field? Man, who is the other ones then who didn't raise the arm? So you're probably not that technical, so I made it really simple, hopefully, to explain actually really how this works, because I think it's very important to really understand like what the tool, the blockchain can do and how it works. Because right now, especially in the non-tech community, it's very theoretical and philosophical almost and it's a very concrete technology actually. So very short introduction, what blockchain is. It's a system out of 3 components. And these components, most of them actually already existed since a long time. So we have a distributed network. So a bunch of computers just run software. This software can connect to each other and form a network. Kind of like eMule and BitTorrent and whatever we had for file sharing does the same thing. So we have a consensus algorithm, and that's kind of like the key piece inside this technology, because it tells you how the network reaches consensus, or how every node in the network knows what is the current valid last state. And this is done through consensus algorithms, and there are a few, and the currently mainly used is called proof of work. So basically, you put a lot of computing power in, and others can see that you did that. And the one who puts the most in, is seen to be the latest state, the latest block, the latest set of transactions. So it's kind of like a competition here. And the third piece is that everything on the blockchain is digitally signed. So the network knows who is able to make what transfers, or who is able to make what transactions and actions on the network. And that's kind of really key. So everything has an originator, even though you might not know who the originator itself is. And this creates a rather transparent network, right? It's rather transparent. As of today, most blockchains are completely transparent. So you can see all the actors, you can see all the transactions, you can see all the account balances, all the code, who's deployed and how it's executed. So it's fully public, but it's pseudonymous instead of anonymous, because you don't really know who's behind these addresses. And it's kind of like people on the street, if you don't know the names, right? People walk there and you don't know who it is. So this creates this nice thing, and it's called blockchain because it's always blocks of transactions. So there are transactions that get bundled into a so-called block, and then people the network reaches consensus around that set of transactions, and then once they did that, they go on, collect a bunch of transactions again, they form a new block, and they reach consensus about that. And therefore, there are these blocks in the system in order that they have time to reach consensus about a specific data set, which is a specific set of transactions. So, and you can see here, people can like make money transfers, and this is kind of like the time. So at this point, she makes the transfer to somebody else, and at this point, this other user is executing a function on the smart contract, or maybe deploys a smart contract. Another computer program makes a function and data value transfer. So over time, people basically send transactions, they are in these blocks, and things happen on chain, so to say. So that's the very basic overview. I hope you catch that in that shortness. So how do tokens work? And that's kind of, I see a lot that this is not really understood, because there are different type of tokens, right? So there's the Bitcoin token or the Ether token of the Ethereum network. These are native tokens. These tokens are built in within the network in order to secure the network. So the reason is, if I want to use that network, I have to pay a fee in whatever the native token is. And the reason is, if I wouldn't pay anything, I could spam the network and make every computer in the network work as much as I want. So in order that this is not possible, it costs me to do so. This at the same time creates a value for the token because there's demand for it, and this in reverse creates an incentive for the miners to even secure the network in the first place, because they don't do this because they're good people, they just do this because they get money. They get tokens for it. So it's a very nice incentive cycle. It creates a self-sustaining, perpetuating machine. Tokens itself on the Ethereum blockchain, or on any blockchain, but currently Ethereum is the only blockchain which really does smart contracts, so it allows complex logics and complex token models. And I'm not going to the history of where that came from, because I guess we will not have enough time for that, but basically what a token is, it's a smart contract. It's one smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain in this case, and this smart contract itself defines what the token is and its account balance and so on. So it's basically just a set of account balances. So the user's account balances. And the smart contract itself determines how this gets moved around and how it's internally happening. So on the beginning, people wanted to make all kinds of tokens, and the first token which actually got sold, as far as I remember, on the Ethereum blockchain was the DIGX token, and the idea was to have some kind of like token which represents gold in a vault in Singapore, so you could buy gold without owning physical gold. There was no standard back then, so they came up with their own standard. The problem really fast shows that if everybody has a smart contract which does tokens, but they're all different, then how you interact with them, yeah? You would have to integrate them into your wallet, like token 1 and token 3 and token 4 and 5, and exchanges would have to adopt each single one, writing specific code for each single token. So we came basically up with like, okay, we should standardize this and have a discussion around that. And Vitalik did that initially by writing an initial draft. I then took that draft and created the issue number 20 on the GitHub repository. And that's why it's called ERC20. So I called it an Ethereum request for comment, and it became the ERC20 token standard, like the norm of the blockchain. But it's actually nothing else than a very simple interface standard. So it says, okay, if you make a token smart contract, then it should have a total supply function. It should have a balance off function where you pass in, like, give me the balance of whatever address right now, and a transfer function, and a few more functions. So if everybody uses the same function names on their smart contract, suddenly you can integrate all these tokens by simply pointing always to a different token address, to a different smart contract of a different token. And you have to change nothing in your core logic of your exchange or of your wallet. That happened, and people went for it, and then it adopted over time. It's kind of like a quasi-standard. So it adopted over time, not because we said this is the standard, but because people used it. And actually, you can see here, it was created in 2015, November, and officially merged as a standard was in September 2017. So until then, it was like, just an issue on GitHub, let's say. But this thing actually is what created all of these crazy token sales we have today. And there are probably already, I don't know the real numbers, but it's probably between like $2 and $4 billion collected just in ICO token sales today. And there are many. And I lost already a few months ago a complete overview over them, because there are probably like 20 every day or something, or 100 every day, and new ones coming. So the question is, why is this so successful, and what is an ICO at all, right? And that's a really interesting question here, and this is also the reason why ICOs itself are so popular, and I think it's a very important thing to understand. An ICO itself is nothing else than a smart contract, which facilitates the sale, and this works the following way. There's a smart contract which says, you send me X amount of Ether, which is the native currency and the one which has the most value, so people have it and trade it and use it. You send me Ether, and once I get Ether, I automatically talk to the token X contract and allocate number of X token to you. And that's all what an ICO does. You can like then have obviously a lot of like different logics. You can say, okay, if you come early in, then you get even more tokens for your Ether than when you come later, or even reverse Dutch auction where the last one determines the price of the token, and you can like invent all kind of things. And people try to invent all kind of things in order to make it as fair as possible for everybody to be able to participate, because there is kind of like, especially in the ICOs between June 2017 and August, there were like storms. Like once there was an ICO, it was basically over within half an hour, 1 hour, and it was between like 5 to 100, 300 million collected. So that's the beauty of it. So imagine Kickstarter, and the only thing what Kickstarter is here is the smart contract. It does everything. The moment you send it, it's the moment when you get ownership of your token. So, and what the smart contract itself, the token contract itself does is nothing else than it moves, if you transfer your tokens, it moves simply from one account balance to another. So it's simply changing, hey, subtract from this account balance if the owner of the tokens now transfers them and add it to this new one. That's all what is actually happening. And because it's a smart contract, the internal logic of this token can look however it wants to. So technically you can have an own token where there's an administrator who can like subtract and add the account balance as he wishes, or it is a complete unowned token where even the creator has no control over whatever happens after he deployed the smart contract or after the ICO, released the initial coins, which is obviously the preferred one. So we kind of like had this ICO rush and it's going on and so on, and right now people are thinking about what can be a fair ICO. So how can we make this whole process more fair? Because right now there's like an X amount of time, like 20 days or whatever. People collect money. Once they get the money, they have a lot of money to use. And they can use that money the way they wish. And now, because some of these projects collected 12 million and the Ether price X, 10X or whatever, now they have 50 or 90 million. Now these ICOs actually have so much more money than they even initially expected, so they start to invest in other ICOs or they start to invest in other projects, which is great because this is increasingly accelerating the development in this space and around the tools and so on. So it's like a very self-accelerating machine, the whole blockchain space. That's probably also one of the reasons why it grows so fast, because there's money in and it actually gets more and more and more, to at least for now and to a certain degree. So the thing is, but how can you make that more secure? Because what happens then is first now everybody wants to make an ICO. And people want to sell tokens even though their idea and their business model doesn't require one. So they squeeze in a token, for no reason, make the system more complicated, have a questionable economy or economic incentive around that token, and sometimes none. And that's obviously not very cool, and people have to really think about that. But what happens is because so much money comes in, people kind of collect the money and in a way feel like now their job is over, when in fact the job should just start now because they collected the money for something, right? So how can we make fairer ICOs? And Vitalik came up with a model which is very similar to the model I will describe after, which I came up as well for the project I'm currently working on. And this is, he called it the DAICO, the DAO ICO. And the way how it works is basically that the token holders, so first the money doesn't get immediately released to everybody, to the whole team. So they don't collect the money and suddenly they have it, but it gets released over time. And the token holders or the contributors can basically vote on how much they get per month or per second in this case. You can make it in real time. There's no reason to split this off by month. So how much they actually get released per second. And they could also, in this model, vote that the contract stops and everything can be withdrawn. So it's kind of a mixture between there's some control on the contributor side because they can kind of like stop the project if they see it's going nowhere, and a way to even improve the payout if they need more money and everybody sees it succeeds. It's a very interesting idea. It might get complicated with some edge cases, but basically the attack vectors here would be, you could make a 51% attack, for example, if everybody tries to raise the tab indefinitely to spend the money earlier, then an honest developer could basically lower the tab at all times again, or he would just not claim the funds because he's not required to withdraw the funds, only because he now can withdraw more. If developers would spend that money on Lambos rather than on the work, people could put the smart contract in a withdrawal state and basically cancel the ICO and at least get out the remaining funds. And if somehow they would basically cancel it on purpose as an attack, then he could always make another ICO. So that's an interesting concept, and this is all very unproven. But the interesting thing is, because you can program these rules into the smart contract, you can come up with whatever new rules. And they can work whatever way they want. And the nice thing here is that this will work this way, and there's no way around that. So the developers will not be able to reach the money if it's not coded that way, and the contributors cannot either withdraw or whatever do they if it's not coded that way. So the idea I had is very similar, interestingly, but I didn't know about his idea, but it's very similar. I think my idea is a bit more simple, but it's not working for all use cases. It's kind of the same thing. The idea is that money is not given immediately, but it's given over time. And the idea here is basically money is giving over time, let's say, over 2 years. So rather than giving, let's say they collect 10 million, rather than giving the 10 million at once, you give it over 2 years. And how this would work is basically, I call it the Tesla truck ICO because it looks like a Tesla truck. So the idea here is basically, you would have a pre-sale or whatever, and you would have the ICO phase. And the ICO phase is kind of like the contribution phase, when people contribute, right? In this case, you could say it's 10 days or 22 days or 20 days or whatever. In this case, people can contribute money, and they could always take the money out again. So one thing we saw is that people see, oh, ICO, everybody's investing and they're investing too, and then they realize, oh, I didn't even read the page, scroll down and, oh, it's actually not that good, but they're in, right? So if you make a refundable ICO, you basically allow these people to always go out if they figured out it was not a good idea to invest in the first place. So it's kind of like you only have the people in who really believe in the project and idea itself. And then rather than giving the money completely at once, you give it over time. And the idea here is that every investor or contributor can go out of this ICO at any point in time. Obviously, he could only withdraw whatever is currently left. So in this case, if he would withdraw here, he could basically withdraw 50% of the ether he put in, and he would have to burn 50% of its token. So this way, like if he decides, okay, I don't believe in the project anymore, or for example, the project can fail naturally because people realize, okay, they will not succeed in their goal or whatever, then people can go out and they lost only half of that money, let's say. So the project itself can naturally fail. And at the same time, if these tokens are, if you basically go out, your tokens are put back for sale again. So if somebody else comes along and believes in the project, he can simply buy them again. So this way, kind of, in a way, the token sale is ongoing for a long period of time, and it's always possible to go in and out. So you can basically see, oh, it's all bought up, and I really would like to join, then you can just refresh your page every day, or look in your blockchain explorer and see if that token is available again to participate at some point, for example. And it also nicely shows what is the trust in the project itself, and if you would have this token being tradable, then it would kind of like give you the base price. And the base price is whatever you can still take out in Ether, for example, out of the ICO. So there's one tricky part with that is if you sending in your tokens to withdraw your money, so you decide I want to go out, and I want to go out at 50%, right? You basically would have to send all your tokens in, and I have a nice chart here. You would have to send all your tokens in, and you would get basically back half of the tokens still, and you would get back 50% of the Ether, because they were still held in the smart contract and whatever the project couldn't withdraw them anyway. So, but the 50% of the tokens you get back, they must be now locked. Because if this balance wouldn't be locked, you could like withdraw again, 50% of these 50%, of these 50%, you know, you could withdraw forever. So basically you have to prevent that they can move these tokens around or withdraw them again. And without creating two types of tokens, which would be complicated for exchanges, you basically just say there's a locked balance which you can't move and there's a movable balance. In the past ICOs, what happened is that basically the ICOs were for a blockchain project. A blockchain project means somebody wants to start a new network, which has its native token, and it promises X or epsilon, either some technology or some kind of specific use case or whatever. So what people do is they're selling a token on the Ethereum blockchain because you can make this ICO logic, you can program the smart contracts, and you can do all these things. And at some point, you would have to change these tokens on the Ethereum blockchain with the native tokens once the network starts, for example. So in this case, you would say your balance is locked, but you could always redeem it in the point when actually the network starts. So this ICO model, for example, wouldn't really work for models where you have a usage token where the token is only existing on the Ethereum blockchain, and for example, it's like a utility token within a smart contract system or so. So the idea is basically that people who have movable balances and they have locked balances, obviously they wouldn't have locked balances if they wouldn't withdraw their money. And in this way, it gives you a nice incentive because if you participate, you can always get out and get something out, but you don't lose the part you already basically burned, right? So if the project still succeeds, you still have these tokens, you can redeem them for the native token, and you made maybe a better deal or a worse deal. That's up to whatever happens to this project on the end. And we are doing this exactly for the project. I'm working and creating my own project, and the idea here is to create a specific special purpose chain for the fashion and design industry. So it's kind of the same what we saw in the past, but instead of us bringing innovation through a new blockchain design, because a lot of people are working on that, it's bringing innovation through making special industry blockchains or special purpose blockchain, so-called. And I foresee this coming in the next years very strongly, that a lot of industries and specific use cases, for example, supply chain tracking, will use their own blockchains in order to have their own set of rules or their own resources and so on and so on. So we actually have spent now 23 minutes. I would say we can open for questions.
Two claps here.
Okay.
Yeah, it does, no? Oh, that's just okay. Any questions? Yes, please.
Also a question. Hello. Thank you, Fabian, for this fascinating talk, short and concise. The main idea in the end was fascinating, the fair ICO. I think we're going to hear a lot about unfair ICOs because the bad news are always the most interesting news. And the question will be, how will we react? How will the regulators react? What will happen next? What you introduced as an idea has, of course, a number of challenges. One is the regulatory one. I'm a lawyer myself, and I know that as soon as you create an instrument that gives the holder the right to demand his money back, it's a totally different instrument, a totally different animal than what the tokens that are issued now are. So that's one problem with your idea. The other one, I think, is more conceptual, really. If I think, the instrument that preceded ICOs, we still remember them, were simple financing rounds in startups. And there, as a startup, and some in this room maybe have gone through this process, I've gone through it for clients many times, the good thing is once you've collected the money, you can spend it, and you can also have a bad month or a bad year if you have collected enough money, where the investors on your board grumble, but they can't shut you down that easily. Whereas here, if I understand your model right, every day people, you get bad press, somebody in your company has done something that was not so good, half your money is gone. How do you square that with something that's halfway sustainable?
Yeah, so actually I would say two parts. First, yes, you're right, there is regulatory. And the nice thing about smart contract is that you actually can program these rules. So rather than like relying on like, hey, you not do this because you signed this paper here, it doesn't work any other way. They can, so you could say there are rights to get the money back. If it's programmed this way, they will. No matter whoever doesn't agree with that. If this is the rules basically they agreed to, and that's what the smart contract will execute in any case, no matter if the project likes it or the contributors likes it, it will happen. So this is the nice thing what the blockchain gives you. So in this case, I would say it's better to have actually self-regulation rather than trying to put something on top of that, because the technology itself will work this way anyway. And sure, you can then make enforcements in the real world, but the question is, if there's like a few million stuck somewhere, they don't move. No matter if a judge says this, it will still not move. It will do whatever the program was programmed to do. So it's more important to think as a regulator, how can we actually use that and understand this technology and build in smart ways of handling this? Like, for example, ideas like this, how can we do it in a way that it is fair, but we program that fair? So rather than enforcing it on top, build these rules in and think of how we can build this in. Because you can build regulation into the code, right? The second part is, especially when it goes about ICOs for blockchains itself, or like rather big projects. I mean, we've seen in the 80s and the 50s, we've seen companies with a few $50 and $100 billion valuation, oil companies and so on, and this was huge, Before there was like family companies and so on, so it grew over time. Then the internet came, and we had like $500 billion evaluation companies. Now we have Apple with almost $1 trillion. And I would just predict it now that we will see in the not so far future networks which have multiple trillion-dollar values. Because this is what a network actually can do and achieve. Because it's a common owned good, and the more attractive and useful it gets, we probably will not believe what kind of evaluation they can have, and we already are at the 500 billion, just the whole blockchain space together. And concerning the money available, right? So for example, in ICOs, you will not exactly collect only the money you really need. You would probably collect a lot more. So for example, if this ICO would collect 20 million, you technically maybe really to work through it need 3 million. So, but you have 20 million available. First, this gives you the error phase, it gives you rerun, and it gives also this ability that when things go down and up, that it really doesn't affect you right now. If you have 20 million, you can pay yourself out 800,000 per month, given the fact that the money stays in the pot. That's most of the time. For depends on what the project is, a very good runway. So you will not really calculate that tight. And the other reason why you would actually collect so much is if you make a pre-sale for a network, and you let's say collect 20 million for that network, then the initial market cap of that network is 20 million. As we've seen in the blockchain space, even more or less good projects have a market cap of 1 billion or 10. So, it's already, the upside is so high, and until now almost every ICO, and sure we are in a growth phase, so, right, almost every ICO, probably every ICO made some form of return, but almost every ICO had a return of 5 to 10x. Obviously this is not sustainable forever, and this will change over time, because we are just in the beginning and this is just moving up. But just because of the fact that in certain cases, the growth is just there because of it is a network itself. It's mostly open source, it's commonly owned, it has some kind of functionality not only for one company who creates a wallet garden and gateway, but it actually creates an ecosystem which is controlled and owned by everybody. So it's a complete different beast of how the whole world will look before in the business world, right? So I would say that's all things which have to be considered and thought out, and I think it can be worked out. So,
before we hand over, I would be a little bit careful and ask him again, because when Andreas is smiling like he does, he's very skeptical. So for that reason, well, I do, and for that reason, have another talk at least in the break with him. Now we have another one.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a lawyer and banker from Frankfurt. First of all, thanks for the introduction of the FAIR ICO, which basically follows what we bankers used to do all the time, or should have done. My question is, and this worries me most when I think about ICOs coming up in the future, I see regulation encroaching on us on an ever-increasing speed. In the past couple of months, the American Securities and Exchange Commission has not officially ruled on ICOs or on tokens to be securities yet, but they've made a number of statements and investigative reports and things like that that make it pretty clear tokens are securities under US law. When I talk to the BaFin, I believe I would have a hard time convincing them that even a utility token is not a Wertpapier, a security, as soon as it is transferable and tradable on some crypto exchange. So what worries me a bit, and I would like to have the view of the experts here in the room, would we have to write, in future, would we have to write white papers that would also qualify as a securities prospectus?
I can't really answer that question in detail, but I have a few thoughts to this. I would say, first off, I'm coming from the developer perspective. I'm coming from what's technically possible and what actually is technically done today. That's a very different perspective than when you come from the law perspective, which is based on tradition and law formed around like certain things happening, you know, and it changed over time based on whatever happened back then, and so on and so on. I would also say that what has to happen here is a rethinking, because this technology allows something which was not possible before. Before there was always the middleman, the entity, the trusted. So you have to basically create laws around that in order to make sure that this guy is not stealing, that this guy has to fulfill his obligations, and that each party gets what they're supposed to be getting, what is in this case written on paper. But here you have automatic enforcing, and especially when you only deal with cryptocurrencies or like tokens, which could be even a euro token as well, right? These things are automatic. There's like the regulation is built in, let's say, because if the rules are X, then they will enforce this way. I mean, it doesn't mean that there cannot be bugs, and this is obviously problematic in any case, and probably also have bugs in law contracts where there's then suddenly the loophole, you know, people can use and so on. But I would say, rather than thinking how we regulate this with the old perspective, because many of these laws around securities, they are built because things needed to be enforced in a certain way. You know, there was just not this automatic enforcing, so you have to basically create a set of rules around that. And this is a complete different beast, and we have to think it from this complete different perspective. So you can say, is this now a security or not, blah, blah, blah. I mean, if I issue something, you know, that doesn't mean whoever invests, if I have a security pamphlet or whatnot, that doesn't mean my project will be successful and the money might be completely wasted. So I mean, the SEC will not determine that project is a good one or a bad one. It will only determine that whatever, you know, they say they do or whatever the token says it does, that they have to at least, you know, adhere to that. And that's great and that's fine, but if you program it this way, for example, if you program the rules that the project itself can only take so and so much out and people can withdraw at any point in time, then both parties can't do anything else than that. They cannot convince the smart contract to take their money and bribe them. The code would just not care. You know, it would be built this way. So I would say from a regulatory perspective, it's more important to think what this technology can do and how we can actually build in regulation, come up with really good models, use a lot of the knowledge from the past and how this was done, and basically say, okay, how we can basically map that into a smart contract automatic execution, how this would look like. And there could be so many nice standards coming up and proposals around that. And you can then map that on the blockchain. Eventually, this will happen anyway, so this is where it's going. We are right now in the phase where people are trying to discover that. You know, the old world meets the new world, and it's kind of like a little bit of Annäherung here. So, sure. But I mean, they also are aware that they don't want to over-regulate.
It's Tom now next, and then Matthias.
One short comment. I think you have a blind spot because there's things you cannot later regulate with software, like misleading statements. We have cases of ICOs and others where people on websites declare that something is pre-programmed. It's not. You cannot, with software, enforce anyone making misleading against that, right? unless in a way you allow only people to say something that is automatically checked by a software against some kind of truth standard.
That's exactly.
I'm sorry, let me just finish.
Sure.
It's a big blind spot that I think that you're saying, when you're saying you can program regulation, everything. When it comes to protecting vulnerable market participants and misleading statements, it's conceptually not possible. Right? And that's a huge thing, because the SEC might not say a project is good or bad, but misleading statements can be determined later on. And we have cases out there already. EY, I think, in a report recently said they found but some ICOs where things that shouldn't have been possible were actually possible under the code. And so in a way, there's fraud going on. There's no way to regulate with software against that before. And just a short comment.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct with that. And I'm not saying that the ICOs out there, how they are done today, and all of them are perfect. I mean, we are seeing such a flood of ICOs. And again, like I said, many people now, like everybody wants to make an ICO without that there's even a point for their token in most of the cases. So actually, the ICOs in the past, where they were selling a blockchain token, made sense. In many cases, it doesn't make sense. And obviously, misleading statements and what actually is already coded and what they are saying is, you can't really control that. But the ideal, and I'm coming from the coder's perspective, and really from what the vision is for that future tech, it's not what we are right now. It's actually what we can build with that and with these kind of tools. And the vision and the future vision is basically that you are able to basically automatically verify that whatever is set here is actually programmed in chain. And there's things called like formal verification, where people can write specifications which adhere to these formal verifications. You can run them against any code on chain, and you can see that this code does only X or epsilon. So obviously this needs these kind of tools to be built. It needs the specs to be written, and it needs the tools to show you, clearly show you that this is working this way. And ideally, it also needs reputation systems, like, okay, this is a verified smart contract, and it adheres to standard X or epsilon or whatever or not. So, but this is all tools which can be built and to improve this space, and we are very early here, so, yeah. Okay. But it's possible.
I must say, before Matthias is speaking, if you are pleading for help and support, you are surrounded by lawyers, and now it's the fourth lawyer who is approaching you. And if you need any defense, let me know. I will try to help you. Matthias.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that you won't need defense on that, because this will not be in a text. So thank you.
Keep it closer to your mouth.
Thank you for the very interesting, intriguing talk. And I was very, very glad to see that you have developed so many ideas around fairness, the notion of fairness on ICOs, which, to bring the old and the new world together, is indeed something that lawyers have spent their minds on since Roman times for 2,000 years. But at the end of the day, the ICO is just a means, as I understand it, of raising capital, what the startups have done in financing rounds before, and even back in medieval times concerns the relation between creditor and debtor. So basically, the mechanism is new. The idea and the question, what is fair and how to achieve it, is not. And just as a first comment, even from a developer's perspective, it might make sense to bring these words together, not the mechanism of enforcement, because the enforcement doesn't play any role in the realm of smart contracts, but the notion of how to do it, what kind of rules are built in there. So this is the first point.
Matthias, closer to the mouth.
Okay, and the second point is also concerning the relation between the technology and the law, and the notion of smart contracts and self-enforcement, which indeed eliminates all need for middleman and for regulation that is focused upon the middleman. But a great part of the regulation, and in that aspect I absolutely agree to the speakers just before me, a great part of the regulation is also centered around the notion on fairness, on distributional issues, and on circumstances, how to raise the money, get back the money, and customer protection. So I would disagree to say that, or I would disagree to the thesis that just because you have a smart contract, regulation is not relevant anymore, because what the contract does is the rule and the law and is set. I don't think so. I think the law is a layer above the smart contracts, and even though you don't need the law to enforce the individual transaction, there will be regulators who have a look on the system. And even if they can't agree on the system and on the transaction, They will focus on the players, and there will, at the end of the day, someone who is operating that system, and that one will be subject to regulation. I mean, we've seen it in the copyright context in the beginning, mid-90s, where the law lagged behind the actual digital developments, and the regulator had no way of combating copyright infringements. So what they did was to focus on networks, to focus on platforms, and to develop concepts of liability, so everyone at the end had to comply. And this is something which also from a development perspective should be kept in mind. And I absolutely agree that a constructive dialogue between the developers who are setting up the systems and the regulators will make sense. Because at the end of the day, I think the regulation, which is after a long chain of legitimization democratically
Matthias, can you
forced,
come to an end?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, the regulation might prevail.
I mean, I fully agree with what you say. I mean, I'm not saying that one leg will like disassemble or like make the other obsolete. It's more about actually, you know, instead of building like trying to enforce it from the physical world. In these cases, sometimes you can't, and so it's about actually building this in. And seeing it as a tool and what you can do with it and what new possibilities you have. And it's actually the dream of every lawyer. You know, you could technically, you know, automate things you want to automate by writing a paper contract, and you can actually automate them here. It makes it like less stressing. Like, I mean, what I showed before, the beauty of the ICO is the only thing in order to participate technically I have to do is sending one transaction. Send my money in and I get exactly what I want back. And I have the rights to move them around and whatever not. And if I have a withdrawal, whatever. I could make a cliff investing as well. I could build everything in if I wanted to. Sure, you know, there has to be still regulation, and also, but the idea is really to build these, to automate these systems more and more, and do it in such a way that there's no trust required, that there's no somebody needs to trust now what is written on this website, but you can actually confirm it because there are other people who build automatic check systems to really confirm whatever they say right now. If they say it like follows this standard, right now everybody's writing ERC20 standard on their ICO. Does it mean that they really follow it? Most likely in this case they will, because ERC20 doesn't do anything besides saying it's a token and has these functions. But it doesn't say if there's an admin functionality, if they could just move balances around as they wish or not. You know, it doesn't say any of those. And these kind of standards have to actually appear. So what is like an unowned system? And the new thing here is you can build actually systems which are unowned. You can really build it very different than the internet before, where there's actually no owner. There's probably somebody who initiated it, like for example the DAICO a few years back. But in this case, even the one who initiated it was like a random person on the world. Like many people deployed the code, and then they randomly chose which one they will now use. Then you could say, okay, somebody wrote the code, right? So you sure can find the source. Let's say the one who kicked the snowball down the hill. But the system itself can then actually just function on its own without a controlling party. So this is the things you can build. And in some cases, this is what you want. In some cases, you want to have more control. But it's all about actually like understanding this from a regulatory perspective and bringing it together. And there's a lot of work being done in this space to really make things fair. It's about actually, the whole thing is open source. It's about like contribution, sharing, and improving society. That's really the main, I would say, values of the blockchain and open source space by default. That there are now a lot of malicious actors who come in and try to reap the fruits, you know, let's say. Happens is not cool. I mean, still actually these tokens sometimes go even up, even though they have no technical value. And we have to figure out which ones have and not. They still go up right now, but
unfortunately, yeah. There's the real world. And the real world also tells us that we are running out of time. We have one final question from the fifth lawyer, and afterwards your leave.
Exactly right. And I'm trying to make it short, and I hope that you would also be able to give us a short answer. So we were talking about the basically automatic enforcement and no controlling third party getting involved in this. But being a lawyer and being also from the insolvency world, there are certain circumstances where a third party, controlling party, would come in and have to start looking at these issues. And my question in a way is, in cases like fraud or insolvency, when there's a third party coming in and checking and maybe needs to cancel certain of these transactions and rewind them, if those technology you've described right now is as anonymous like Bitcoins, how you would actually do that?
So it's pseudonymous. It's not anonymous. So if you know the address behind the person behind the address, then you actually know what they are doing technically. The answer really is you know. I mean, in this case, the nice thing is you have the originator. Let's say you want to rewind this, and the smart contract has this functionality built in that a regulator can come and like undo the thing in some way. You know whom to send it to. All the addresses are basically either within the smart contract or on the blockchain. You don't need to even know who was the person who sent the money in the first place. You could still reimburse him. That's actually the nice thing about it, because the address is the originator, and this person is controlling it. I mean, if he lost the private key, then it's up to him, but technically, you know, he should be able to control it. So you can actually, you know, interact with people without knowing them, and that's what an ICO technically makes possible. It allows people to contribute without that there need to be known parties to each other, and still they have the ownership and maybe voting rights when it's built in or whatever. So that's kind of interesting. But I mean, obviously there are KYC requirements because of AML and so on. You could technically automate that as well. And that's what the ERC 725 identity standard and other projects are doing and making that possible. I mean, giving a bit of time in the future, right?
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's the end, and that's a wonderful last word. Thank you so very much.
Scheiß Geschenk. Vielen Dank.